There's a general issue with health as a resource in games, in that it doesn't really line up with the way that we view health in real life. When you use health in a video game, it generally is just some value that you can deplete with no consequence until you've removed the very last point of health, in which case your character immediately dies. But whenever we think about health in real life, having your health diminish or increase generally means your capabilities diminish or increase. It's sort of an abstract representation of how capable you are. And there's some consequence for losing health. Whether it's just becoming out of shape over time, or if it's some specific injury that it's going to make it more difficult to do daily activities or to even risk your life itself. Losing health has to have some kind of consequence. In games, the last point of health is the only one that matters, but in real life, every single point of health should matter. And this ends up working with the coherence of a story as well. Like if you think about Lord of the Rings, one of the stories that, most fantasy games take some kind of influence from. Characters are injured pretty infrequently, and whenever a character is injured, it becomes a major plot point. Whenever a character, say Frodo, gets stabbed by a ring wraith up on Weathertop, the rest of the plot events kind of take the back seat for a while, because while yes, they do have the overarching goal of destroying the ring, there's no way they can do anything with that until Frodo has been mended. He needs his health to be restored, otherwise there's no way they're going to be able to actually continue on their quest. But if you compare that with something like Dungeons and Dragons, generally a character will get bloodied and battered in basically every battle, but they really don't have any consequence to that. You'll have a character who gets smacked in the side of the jaw with a mace, stabbed a few times in a fight, maybe gets a few arrows in them, and it's a rough battle, but at the end of that, they generally just go about their business and start looting right away. They can break right into dialogue, even though they've just been hit in the side of the face with the mace. So generally getting hit is described as being something that should be impactful on the character. It should be something that has real story consequence, that the character has been maimed in some manner. But generally, it doesn't have any real gameplay effect. The only thing that does is when the character finally runs out of health, and then they go down. And, sometimes they'll just hop right back up again with a bit of healing or treatment. But generally, a lot of those injuries don't have real lasting consequence. So I generally find that this makes things feel unbelievable in a story. And for my own game, I'm trying to make things believable. Not quite a simulation level of believability, but just kind of a puppet show level where things do have to stay grounded to some effect. You still have to make it seem as though the character is getting injured when they're actually getting injured, and the character is then going to have to deal with that injury. So one thing that games will do rather than use health is hit points. And actually with Dungeons and Dragons, they use hit points. And one issue with that is that players generally treat health and hit points as the exact same thing. They'll just use the names interchangeably, and it's really thought of in the same kind of manner. But I really prefer to think of hit points not as like a kind of toughness of your character, like how many hits the character can take before they finally die. I prefer to think of it more of points until your character actually gets hit. So if a character has a weapon swung at them, and they take damage, I kind of think of it more like the character is imperiled. They're at some kind of risk and danger there of this weapon actually damaging and hurting them. but maybe they just narrowly dodge out of the way at the last moment, or maybe it glances off of their armor. So they really don't take any kind of debilitating hit, even though the attack roll has rolled and said the character has been hit. You could still describe the action as though they didn't actually get hurt. Maybe it did hit them, it hit their armor, but it didn't really hurt them. Not the typical descriptions of like the character getting their jaw broken, as this mace strikes them in the face. Basically making battle a bit less bloody until the character's hit points finally does drop to 0, and that's when that debilitating strike happens. And you can describe it differently depending on what kind of character it is. A heavily armored character is more likely to have blows consistently hit them, but glance off their armor. Or a really agile character might dodge frequently. You could have a really rough and tumble kind of character who they do get hit often, but they're just flesh wounds. An arrow strikes into their arm and they just break the arrow off and continue fighting as usual. It's just not a real concern. Or think like Captain Kirk from Star Trek, where a creature would slash at him and his shirt would just tear open. There would be a little trickle of blood to show the creature is a threat, but he's not actually getting injured consistently. Because if you want the story to feel consistent and coherent, you really do have to treat any of those kind of injuries as real plot points. Anytime a strike does make purchase, something needs to be done. And I do like the idea of magical healing and being able to restore those wounds. But it feels a little weird whenever healing is so effective that it's just as easy to heal an injury as it is to cause the injury. You have a lot of games where they're kind of set at parallels where you could either do 10 damage or you could do 10 healing, and it's kind of the same power level cost. But that doesn't really feel like it makes much sense in the way we think of the world, because generally it's just kind of a fundamental difficulty of life that destruction is easier than creation. It just there's an old Magic the Gathering flavor text that I really liked, where creation or destruction is the work of an afternoon, creation is the work of a lifetime. Creation is this it's this slow process that takes a very long time to accumulate, whereas destruction can be very sudden and violent. And if you think about a world where healing magic is so powerful that it's essentially on par with damaging magic, that changes everything. That completely changes power structures of worlds where people don't really have to worry about getting injured anymore if healing is that prevalent and easily accessible. Like it just changes things quite a bit, and it would have a lot of consequences for the way the characters in that world would behave, the way their societies are structured. That's just generally not really covered in a typical fantasy game. So I really prefer to lean more towards the idea that injuries are just not happening all the time in battle. Rather describing the action of these narrow misses and artful dodges that are really kind of allowing the character to represent that they are, wearing out, or their morale is dropping as they face these perilous moments that really give them this sense of death being nearby. But they're not getting hurt over and over and over again. So in my own game, I lean more towards that hit point concept where it's points until you get hit, but I really don't want players to consistently think of health and hit points and such as this interchangeable thing. So rather than call it hit points, I call it luck. Because I think luck is really a real world representation of how we view that hit points kind of concept. I think it ends up being a more accurate representation than health, because health would represent some actual kind of sliding scale of how capable the character is currently. As they are getting hit, they're becoming less and less capable till they finally die. Whereas hit points is kind of this nebulous thing that really doesn't have a real representation. And that's something luck. Like, that is what we treat in the real world luck as. And as your luck is pressed, as you're, dealing with these perilous events, someone swinging a sword at you, or, you tumbling down a hill or whatever it might be, it's understandable to people that there's kind of this diminishment. Like, you keep using up your luck, and eventually your luck's going to run out, and then some kind of consequence is going to be caused because of that. So for that, I have mishaps. Whenever your luck eventually runs out, you will have some kind of mishap. So if I boot up my game here, in the bottom left here, this white bar is your luck bar. And this is basically like your health bar. It's basically your hit points bar. But for this particular game, it is luck. And you can see as I have this spike trap right here, I'm going to switch to third person here. Right now, my character doesn't have any animations on it because I'm working on remaking the model and the skeleton. So they're just kind of static and just, don't really do anything. But you see this little spike trap here. And as I walk onto the spike trap, it's going to do a check. I'll pop up the little check here. It's a competence check. It's basically like the skill check or save in Dungeons and Dragons, same kind of concept. I don't want to explain the whole thing at the moment because it would just be too much for one video. But I have this aspect system where you have these 6 aspects, which are, very similar to the ability scores in Dungeons and Dragons, same kind of concept. And then you have these proficiencies in different things, like medicine or foraging or what have you. And these are, kind of similar to the skills in Dungeons and Dragons. But basically, whenever you're doing some kind of event, you could do this kind of competence check to determine how the results are going to turn out, basically. And this particular thing here, it pays attention to like what your athletics ability and or your aspect and your awareness are, and then it can use some other kind of modifiers. But as I stand on this, you see it did a couple of checks here. I failed. I can take a look at like what the actual competence check result is. It like took note of what my current value for athletics and awareness were. I didn't have any modifiers to add to it. I needed to get an 80, and then it like did a random roll as part of that. Then added like my athletics to the random roll. Gives me a result. The result is lower. It's the same kind of concept as the skill checks and saves in D&D. So basically, I stepped onto these spikes, and I received peril because I failed the check. So the actual peril that was caused, it gathers up a whole bunch of tags about the source of the peril and the target of the peril. So you can think of, me stepping on the spike trap, but also if I was going to like swing a sword at someone, all that kind of stuff. You gather up all these tags, and these tags kind of define a whole lot of different things about the character. What kind of creature they are, how quickly they're moving, basically, like if they're trying to run or if they're just walking or just standing still or whatever. It will gather tags about like where it hit you, what kind of source it is. So basically these are just kind of like context tags, so that whenever you run out of luck, you can have contextual consequence. Generally in games, whenever you like run out of health or hit points, you just drop down, you just die or go unconscious, whatever it might be. But with this idea, you gather up all these context tags about what just happened to the character, and you don't immediately die. Instead, you just gain some kind of mishap. So I gained a stab wound. And you can see my luck is back up to 90. Each time I stepped on this, I took 55 peril, right? You can see that there. So in total, that's 110. I have 100 by default. And, so I lost 100, which basically was enough to like burn through this whole luck bar. And then there was kind of 10 that overflowed, basically. So I'm at 90, but I basically like went through a whole luck bar already. I hope that's clear enough. I need to work on like the way the bars animate to really represent, hey, you just ran out of luck, something happened. But because I stepped on these spikes, it's causing piercing. I call it peril instead of damage. I guess I'll get back around to that in a moment. But I caused this mishap to myself. So this mishap is that contextual consequence for running out of luck. And, if I were to do something else rather than step on, sharp spikes, some kind of different thing would occur. And I'll show some of those in a little bit. But I want to kind of describe what a mishap is. So the mishap is it basically exists in different states, so you can see, I can't like use my cursor to like point at things at the moment because I need to be hovered over this to show it. But there's kind of like at the top, like right under that kind of dagger icon, there is a just general description of what the mishap is doing. It's just a sharp object has pierced your flesh. So the mishap then exists in like one of 3 different states. It can be untreated, treated, or remedied. So it just occurred, so it comes in on this untreated state. And you can kind of think of this like Magic the Gathering, where you have like an untapped and a tapped state, and then, there's kind of another state where you like flip the card face down in Magic. But generally you have this like untreated and treated state. Those are the main ones you're concerned with, that like untapped and tapped kind of thing. So this immediately occurred. It comes into the untreated state. And it says for that state, you're bleeding out. Every 5 seconds, you take a -1 penalty to your maximum breath and energy. And that's these bars here. The red is breath. The blue is energy. And you can see the second number here. This is the maximum. And it just keeps ticking down. So every 5 seconds, it's ticking down by 1. Now, in order to treat this, I can right-click it. I'm going to give myself a bit of medicine proficiency as just like a debug. I can just add them just because I'm trying to debug things and test stuff. But normally you would be getting that from like, completing quests. You would find like books, and like you'd find a book about medicine, read that book, and it would give you medicine proficiencies, that kind of thing. Just doing various things in the world to gain those different proficiencies, and like gaining different related skills and all that kind of stuff would boost your proficiencies. So whenever I do this, I can try to treat this. I'm just going to right click it, and you can see I'm attempting treatment. So it's just that same kind of competence check idea, like as I went over this spike trap, where it does this check. It's kind of like, for this one, it's taking my intellect and my medicine, multiplied by some amount to determine if I will actually succeed at this. And I basically succeeded at kind of bandaging myself and stopping this. So you can see now it's in the treated state, like it turned from red to green, and you can see like the treated state is the one that's kind of highlighted there with that different border now. It's enlarged a bit and such. But now what it says is you've patched up the wound, but the penalty from blood loss remains until you rest. So you can see I'm no longer losing the maximum breath and energy here, but it's not getting any better. I rambled here for quite a while before I actually got around to treating this stab wound. So the idea is my character was basically bleeding out the entire time. So what I need to do is rest now to get rid of that. So I'm going to switch back to first person here, and I'm going to run over to my medic. So you can see if I look at the mishap there, clear down at the bottom of the text, it says rest reaction, remedy on rest. So what that means is whenever I rest, it'll switch the mishap to the third state to talk about, which is the remedied state, which generally means the thing probably isn't doing anything anymore. I'm not exactly sure. Like, I need to rethink some of the states and that kind of thing. But generally, the idea is with the remedied ones, they're not really doing anything anymore, but they're still around as kind of a scar, because the amount of mishaps you have in total makes a difference. You know, you don't die in this game from having zero luck. You know, instead you get this mishap. But instead, as you keep accumulating mishaps, eventually you die because you just have too many on you. You can kind of think of it like a lot of boss battles or enemies where they'll have like 3 health bars or something like that. So you basically just have that same kind of system, but all characters utilize that kind of thing. So if I go ahead and interact with this bed here, you can see now my maximum values are back up to 100, and this is switched over to the remedied state. So you've fully healed, but a painful scar reminds you of your close brush with death. At this point, it's doing nothing except kind of counting toward my mishaps. So if I go over again and just stand around and basically just get injured here for a bit, you know, you can see they keep stacking up. For this, there's only one possible mishap. It's just these stab wounds, and I keep getting those. But whenever I get too many of them, you see there, now the character's dead. You know, they don't have an animation for it or anything because, again, messing with the skeleton. But I basically, like, stopped possessing that character, and now I'm just like a floating spirit flying around the world, essentially. So that character has been killed because they just had too many mishaps. But I can take another character here and possess them. You know, they do not have any of these mishaps, but let me get a different mishap here. This time I will take some fall damage, or fall peril. I guess, yeah, here's a time to bring that up again. So the reason I call it peril instead of damage, because damage implies you've actually hit and hurt something. You know, so if you think about in Dungeons & Dragons, you have an attack roll, which implies whenever you're successful that you actually hit the person. And then whenever you have a damage roll, that implies you've done this amount of damage. So you've actually hurt them by this amount. I think that kind of breaks the narrative consistency of the game, where like you can't talk about hit points anymore as, you know, points until you've been hit. Just because the way things are worded, it just makes it awkward. So I call, you know, rather than saying damage, I call things peril. You know, so any kind of thing, you know, whenever you're receiving this peril, it's a perilous event, where it is like gathering all these contextual tags, you know, saying how much the peril is, determining what happens. And, you know, that basically allows me to say, like, okay, you were imperiled by something, but it didn't actually hit you and hurt you. You know, it's just you were placed at risk. But if I go from this, you know, very high fall here and I jump down, you know, the first thing, it's going to hit my balance, actually. That's just a part of, like, falling peril. It sucks away your balance first. And then if it runs through that, it'll, like, knock you to the ground. You'll fall down. And then it will overflow onto luck. And then if your luck drops low enough, it will cause actual mishaps here. So I would just jump off here and and collapse there for a bit. But as my balance regenerates here, you know, I'll pop back up from that ragdoll state. And you see I've got 3 mishaps because I took a lot of fall damage there, and it kind of just like ran through. So this first one, I got 2 copies of it. You know, that's another thing. I just need more different mishaps. Right now, I kind of just have enough for testing some different scenarios, but I need more to, you know, make things work better. But this is a phrenospasm, which is whenever you have the wind knocked out of you and, you know, you can't catch your breath after that. So basically what this one does is your actual breath gain per second is reduced here, and that is shown as this number right here. It has drop down by 100%, so you're not gaining any breath. You basically can't breathe in while this is going, but then every 1 second, that penalty reduces by 1%. So after 100 seconds, it's completely remedied. It's no big deal. But like during that process, when it's initially on you, your character's gonna have trouble breathing, which is really bad in this game. Well, and in real life too, but it's very punishing. Basically, it'll make your character like fall unconscious if they get too low, and there's other bad effects to it, but not really trying to go into that whole system right now. But this one, it'll kind of cure itself over time. You can treat it, and if I remember, well, it just treated itself by the time I was finished rambling here. But it just switches to remedied there. So it's, no big deal. You kind of just wait for this one to pass. But again, it's still sitting there at remedied, so it's still around, kind of making it more likely you're going to actually die whenever you continuously keep losing luck. So then another one here that I got is bad back. So this one, the character's back is injured, and when it's untreated, it lowers your athletics and your carrying capacity. But then it also makes it so you can't dodge. So like normally if I hit shift, I can like dodge in a direction, but right now it's just not doing that. And then you can see my athletics right here is reduced because you can see it's like down in negatives because I have this bad back happening right now. So something I can do is, try to treat it, because I gave myself and that was the previous character who's dead that had the medicine. So this, I might fail to treat it. I lucked out. I succeeded. So now it is treated, which means it's not hurting me anymore. It's not causing any kind of penalties or anything. But anytime I fail an athletics check, which would be, that same like competence check idea where like I am trying to avoid getting hurt by these spike traps or whatever it might be. Anytime I would, try one of those checks and fail, there's a chance that this is going to flip back over to untreated. So it's this idea that your character's got a bad back now. You can kind of like, and you can see even like the rest reaction on it. It treats it on rest, but it doesn't actually remedy it. It doesn't actually like solve the thing. It just means you're not getting the penalty anymore. You can kind of rest your back, recover, but your character still has that bad back, and you still have to worry about, failing at some kind of athletics check because that's going to make your character potentially re-aggravate that injury. So I'll run over here to the healer and talk to them. So they offer some different services, and one of the things they do is healing. And you can see the different mishaps I've got on me that I can now remove, which normally would have some kind of cost to it. And I eventually want to expand it out where like different mishaps will have different costs to remove, and different kinds of like healers and such that are able to treat the different things, and like different ways that your own character could treat things. But I can just like, take these and I'll just remove those, for instance, those phreноspasms. So, my character's in pretty good shape now. They've still got that bad back though. So there's that risk of them kind of fucking themselves up some more still. I'll go over, this is just like a fire damage one. So it is just causing like, burning damage to me, like a fire peril basically. Like I'm stepping on you can see my crafty little fire there, but you did that. I failed some checks, and whenever I failed some of those checks, it re-aggravated my bad back here. So it's back up to the untreated state. I'm losing athletics again. I can't dodge anymore. So I can go and try to treat it again myself, or I can like, run over here and talk to the medic and actually get it remedied. And again, I would have different costs on them to remove and that kind of stuff. So the idea is like, bad back, maybe it's like pretty costly to get fully removed from yourself, but like reasonably easy to treat. Resting, switches it to treated, so it's not too big of a deal as long as your character can rest up. But it's one of those, it's like kind of a sticky mishap where it's going to stick with you a while. Like your character's going to have to deal with that for a while, but you can get it fully removed. Now my character is just totally fine again. Make sure to make my bed here and then, run off, and I'll, hop on these fire things again. So this one, like I got myself lit on fire. Like I'm currently on fire. The idea for this one, it's basically not really like fully implemented yet, but the idea is, you can see my luck keeps ticking down. I'm on fire, basically. My equipment is on fire. So my luck keeps ticking down, and the idea is it will eventually be able to like damage durability of equipment and kind of like, tick some other stuff down. But you see it. No, pardon me. It ticked down enough that I got another mishap. I'm going to go ahead and treat this actually, so I stop burning here. So this is treated, so it's no big deal anymore. But then this burnt one, like, I actually got burnt there. This one, like my equipment got on fire because of that. But now, like, my actual flesh got burnt. So it's causing like a serious burn distracts you with serious pain, giving a -20 penalty to intellect and awareness. So it's significantly reducing these. So if I were, doing any kind of those competence checks related to those, I'm going to be having a really hard time. And with this one, I have it set up specifically so that it's not a dynamic roll. Whenever you try to treat it, this is a static one. So, you can see the check type, it is static. The other ones have been dynamic. And, like this previous one, I had a dynamic check where you actually like throw a random roll as part of it. The static ones, it's really just looking specifically at what you've got and trying to hit that target. So basically, if you don't have medical skill, you just can't treat this burn. But I'll give myself some medical skill here and, treat it. And whenever it is then treated, it just has the similar kind of penalty, but it's just reduced, so like it's still painful, but like, think of like a burn, it's been bandaged and that kind of stuff, it's not as bad. Put like aloe gel and all that kind of stuff on it. So generally, like, the mishaps all have those different states, and you'll kind of accumulate them over time and really need to consider, how you treat them and what kind of mishaps they are and that kind of thing. And I think a fun part of it is that it makes the individual peril types, like the damage types basically, feel inherently different. It's a pretty standard thing at this point for RPGs of any sort to have damage types. But a lot of times they don't, like the damage type itself doesn't really feel different. It's more that there's just like different thematic elements that are kind of associated with it. You think of like a Pokemon system where like they have all these different damage types and like creature types, but they don't inherently do anything different. It's just that like you make specific abilities that will be grass abilities and specific Pokemon that have grass abilities. And maybe those abilities behave differently and like have some kind of flavor to them. But the damage type itself really doesn't do anything different. But with this, the idea is that damage type should do something different. Like if you pick up a dagger, the kinds of mishaps you're potentially going to cause with that dagger are going to be different than the kind of mishaps you would cause with a mace. And also the locations you're hitting on the character's body change what kind of mishaps are available. So the characters, you can see they're split up into a bunch of different parts here. And, if I circle around, like again, this model and skeleton are very much work in progress. It's just like demo stuff to test stuff out. But I'm really basing this on like Morrowind's character body, where it's split up into these different parts, and like they never really did anything with that. You know, they didn't even have like headshot damage or anything, which surprised me. But all these different parts are tagged differently. So the idea is whenever you hit a character, you know, in the shoulder, that kind of like perilous event kind of thing, it gathers tags about what kind of weapon you're using and all your circumstances and such, but it's also gathering tags about who you're hitting and where you're hitting them and everything. And then within the code, I can reason about those, you know, in a nice efficient manner, because I've basically gathered those tags and can just kind of decide what kind of stuff should happen, basically. You know, so the idea is if you like stab someone with a dagger in the arm, that's potentially going to have different results than if you hit them in the head with a mace. Because like the mace could cause like concussions and, you know, stunning and staggering kind of effects and such. You could also just have specific effects related to being hit in the head, you know, getting dazed and everything. But then if you hit someone, you know, in that arm, like you stab them in the arm, like you have like an arm injury, you know, or you hit them in the leg, there's like leg injuries, there's bleeding effects you can do. So just generally you can make things behave very, very differently in their kind of consequence because of the context that's gathered whenever you actually cause that perilous event. So the overall system definitely still needs a lot of iteration and development. You know, I really need to consider like the different states, if there's any specific stuff that needs to be added, like, you know, a lot of stuff just under the hood to make things work a little better. You know, change how you're treating things, you know, how the costs are paid for the individual mishaps, like how much it costs to treat them at healers, have it set up so like as you're trying to treat it yourself, you know, you're potentially using items, like maybe you want to be using bandages specifically to treat it. You know, you can just have a ton of extra stuff, and basically I need to work to flesh that out. I also really need to flesh out like just more mishaps in general. Like, you know, I kind of see it as like a modular system in the way that like Magic the Gathering is, where each of these things is basically just a card, and you can just add more and more over time and kind of expand the pools for, you know, these different things. Like, it's like, oh, you know, blunt damage is seeming like it's not good enough, or, you know, it needs some alteration. Like, let's add some more, you know, possible mishaps to that or whatever. But there's kind of like a bare minimum threshold to make the system function. Like, I just need more mishaps. You know, so I'm definitely open to ideas. You know, if people have ideas for like what kind of mishap would make sense, and like just kind of thematics of like what would work to describe some kind of mishap or injury, but not, you know, be like a full-on crazy simulator thing. Like, I want them to feel like a board game. It's supposed to be like a very like board game, tabletop game kind of inspiration to it. I was originally adapting this from a tabletop game I was making. So yeah, I would definitely like feedback on that, you know, potential ideas and everything. And yeah, I also need to adjust like the idea of like how many mishaps you can have before you die. Like, that needs work. I'm thinking about maybe doing like slots. So like maybe you have a really tough kind of character, they would have kind of like extra slots that they would gain to say like, you know, this barbarian is able to have like an extra 3 like physical based mishaps before they actually get killed from having these kind of things. I also need to like further differentiate the mishaps into different kinds of things. So like, because the concept here is luck and not just like hit points or health, you can really describe a lot of different things with it. You know, it doesn't have to be only just like injuries. You know, like all the mishaps I've shown here and the ones I have set up, they're just injuries. You know, that's just how they are. But I also like the idea, like maybe you're in a tavern and you're gambling and you can like risk your luck in order to, you know, get an advantage in like a little card game you're playing or whatever it might be. But, you know, your luck might run out because of that. And that could potentially have some like real consequence to what you're doing. Like that needs its own kind of thing where it's just like someone's going to accuse you of cheating then, or, you know, maybe they're going to be some like debt or whatever. You know, like luck is this like really weird nebulous thing where it's like the things need to be related to make the game feel coherent, but at the same time, when we think about luck in real life, there's stuff like you step on a crack and it breaks your mother's back, and really kind of hard to say like how exactly that kind of thing is related in like a cause effect kind of way. So the idea would be that, you know, there might be something like that where like, you know, maybe you gain a mishap that is just kind of like a question mark, you know, where it just kind of says that there's like a curse basically on you, or like, you know, you sense that there's some kind of, you know, unease or something in the universe. I don't know how to describe it, but like, you know that something as bad is going to happen, like some misfortune will befall you, but you don't know what. And then like as you're doing things in the world, they could kind of use them as a resource in a way where it's just like, you know, you go and talk to a character and, you know, the character might look to say like, oh, do they have any of those like question mark mishaps on them? If they do, I'm going to like cause some kind of thing to happen right now. Like this character is going to accuse you of, you know, whatever, and it's going to like cause some kind of thing to happen to you that you were really hoping didn't happen. Or like, you know, I don't know. Like it could be a pretty weird thing. Like maybe you're fighting a boss and like the boss gains some special ability because of that. So I think there's like potential to experiment with those kind of like really unintended things. You know, I kind of think about like in this game, I think it's probably beyond the scope of the game, but like in Dungeons and Dragons where you have like a bastion, you know, maybe it's like your character gets this mishap, but then, you know, you have this bastion where you have like all your NPCs and your buildings and everything, all these things that are important to you. It's like some bad things befall your town basically because of this. Like your character didn't, you know, die or whatever, but some bad thing happened. Maybe some character you care about did die because of it. So I don't know. And like it's kind of a weird like coherence issue where it needs to make sense in a way, but I also kind of want to have those mysterious ones as a potential way to avoid people like gaming the system. So like okay, if you think about where like your character is at like really low luck, you've got like 5 luck left, and you're about to go fight some enemies in the next room, and you're looking at it and you're saying like, I'd rather just take a mishap now so I have a chance to treat it, you know, rather than walking right into the next room and like having them hit me and then, you know, have that untreated mishap that I won't be able to treat immediately because I'll be in combat. So you're like, oh, I'm just gonna take some fall damage, you know, and you just like run up and just start like hurting yourself on purpose and like trying to drop your luck and like take a mishap just so that you get it to like roll over at a more opportune time. So I kind of like the idea of maybe there being those question mark ones that can arise where it's like maybe you don't want to do that because the consequence might be a lot more severe than you expected. You know, you know what kind of mishaps exist for fall damage, and you're just like, well, none of those that bad. I can treat all those, but the question mark mishaps, you know, those might be like really bad. So I don't know. You know, there's also potential for just like curses and like weird stuff. So I want to expand that, experiment with it, and just kind of push the system further. And just kind of like, just iterate on it. Like, I think that's the main thing. A lot of it, it's just like weird stuff. I need to iterate on it. And I'm making this video because I need feedback on it. I kind of feel like game can't be like effectively tested by other people until I sort out this skeleton stuff, because like I do have an attack system that exists, and like, you know, you can hit people in all the locations and have like locational peril and all that kind of stuff. But if you can't do animations, you can't attack, so like it doesn't work at the moment. So basically at this point I'm just asking for some feedback on the overall concept, and I would love to hear people's ideas on that, ideas for potential mishaps, ideas for like, you know, the states. Like, does it make sense to just have like these 3 states? Should it be more? Should it be less? Like, I could definitely see remedied maybe being something I don't list, because I don't know, but like maybe at the same time it should be kind of like a scarred kind of thing, where it's like it is still providing some from some negative effect or whatever. But yeah, I mean, this has been a long ramble. Really appreciate you listening, and thank you very much. I'll talk to you later.